Ruth Hochstetler walked out to her garden in Sugar Creek, Ohio, on a morning in early April, pushed two metal spikes into the damp earth, and ran a wire between them to a clock on her fence post. That clock has kept time for 3 years without a battery. The spikes cost her nothing, the soil cost her nothing, the electricity cost her nothing. Two dissimilar metals pressed into wet ground, that is all. One electrode is copper, one is zinc. Between them, inside the soil itself, a chemical reaction begins that the laws of physics will not stop. A single cell produces 0.5 to 1 full volt of electricity. Every time. Scottish inventor Alexander Bain demonstrated this in 1841. That is 184 years ago. He powered a clock with zinc and copper plates buried 1 meter apart. The same clock that utilities now charge you $135 a month to run. Scientists in Iraq unearthed a device doing the same thing in soil that dates to 250 years before Christ. The global battery market is worth $138 billion. This knowledge is worth nothing to that industry because it cannot be metered. The United States electricity industry collected $491 billion in revenue in 2023 alone. You cannot collect $491 billion from a man who pushes 2 coins into his garden. More than 20 separate patents were filed on variations of this device between 1841 and 1901. Every one of those patents expired. The underlying principle cannot be patented. It belongs to nature. Therefore, it belongs to you. But the regulatory structure built around electricity generation over the last century has made this knowledge quiet, complicated, and in practical terms, very difficult to use. We will tell you exactly what they did, how they did it, and what our community kept doing anyway. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss what we share. Now let us start with what the university researchers found, because this is not folk wisdom, this is documented science. The Earth battery operates on the same principle Alessandro Volta described in 1799 when he built the world's first electrical battery. Two metals with different positions in the electropotential series are placed into a conducting medium. The more reactive metal, zinc, gives up electrons. The less reactive metal, copper, accepts them. Between those two events, a current flows through any wire you connect. Soil works as the conducting medium because it is not dry mineral. Soil is a living electrolyte solution. It contains dissolved mineral ions, organic acids from decomposing material, moisture, and the metabolic byproducts of hundreds of millions of microorganisms per teaspoon. These dissolved ions carry the charge between the two electrodes exactly the way a liquid electrolyte carries charge in a commercial battery. But there is a second layer researchers have documented in the last 15 years. Soil microbial fuel cells. Bacteria in the soil, particularly along the organic-rich boundary between anaerobic and aerobic zones, produce electrons as a natural byproduct of metabolism. These electrons can be captured by an electrode and drawn into an external circuit. Researchers publishing in Oxford Academics journal Clean Energy ran a soil microbial fuel cell continuously for 180 days, powering a running LED light throughout. Their voltage readings ranged from 1.96 to 2.85 volts over that entire period without any added fuel. Just soil. Just microbes doing what microbes do. Separate published study in the journal Biotechnology for Biofuels and Bioproducts tested optimized soil cells and achieved a consistent open-circuit voltage of 782 millivolts across all configurations, regardless of electrode spacing or material variation. That number did not drop, it held steady. Harvard researchers affiliated with a company called Labone Solutions calculated that a soil microbial fuel cell measuring 10.7 square feet would produce 1 full watt, enough to charge a cell phone from the ground. 1 watt from 10 square feet of ordinary soil. No fuel, no combustion, no grid connection. Plain spoken, the science says this: moist soil is an electrolyte. 2 different metals in that electrolyte produce a voltage difference. Connect them with a wire and you have a circuit. The soil also contains living organisms that produce electrons as they breathe, which adds to that output continuously as long as the soil has organic matter to consume. But what the men and women of those early centuries knew by hand and practice, long before the laboratory wrote it down, is a story worth hearing from the beginning. In 250 years before Christ, workers in what is now Iraq built clay jars with copper cylinders inside them and iron rods suspended at the center. These objects were found near Baghdad in 1936 during railway construction. When replicated with acidic liquid inside, they produce 1.1 to 2 volts of direct current. Mythbusters connected 10 of them in series in 2005 and measured 4.33 volts of electricity from ancient clay and metal. These same jars, these same metals, the same reaction, producing measurable current 2,270 years before a single electricity bill was issued in this country. In 1838, German physicist Carl August von Steinheil built the first ground return telegraph system. He used the Earth itself as the return conductor for telegraph signals. His instruments confirmed that electrical potential differences existed naturally between buried metal electrodes. The Earth was not merely a passive medium, it was a participant. In 1841, Alexander Bain buried zinc and copper plates in his garden in Scotland, connected them with a wire, and ran a clock. He filed British patent number 9363. He called it the Earth Battery. The clock ran. By 1875, James Bryan had received United States patent 160,152 for his improved Earth Battery for electric clocks. More patents followed. Garrett in 1868, Snow in 1874, Drawbaugh in 1879. War, Diekman in 1885, each one refining and improving an instrument that needed no fuel and could not be metered. And then came Nathan Beverly Stubblefield. He lived in Murray, Kentucky. He described himself as a practical farmer, fruit grower, and electrician. He was all three. In 1892, he transmitted a human voice wirelessly using the earth as the conducting medium. His neighbor, Rainey Wells, walked a short distance away holding a receiver. He heard Stubblefield say, clearly, "Hello, Rainey." Stubblefield received United States patent 600,457 on March 8, 1898, for an electrolytic coil buried in the ground that drew power from the earth itself and transmitted both electricity and voice signals. His demonstrations were witnessed by hundreds of people. The clarity of his transmissions was described as extraordinary. He could not commercialize the invention. The telephone companies and the early electrical utilities were consolidating. Investment money flowed toward systems that created recurring bills. He died alone in 1928. For generations, these devices powered clocks, telegraph stations, rural signaling equipment, and small lights across Europe and North America. The knowledge passed between farms, between community members, between neighbors who had no interest in a monthly invoice for something the earth provided freely. And then the meters were installed, and the poles went up, and the lines came in, and everything changed. This is just the beginning of what we have quietly gathered for you. Inside our guide, you will find hand-drawn diagrams for building a 12-cell earth battery array from copper pipe and galvanized rod. Instructions for optimizing cell placement along the magnetic meridian to increase output. A plain guide to connecting cells in series to achieve 5 to 12 volts for small devices. A reference for which soil types produce the strongest electrolyte effect. and a state-by-state overview of what your local code says about generating electricity outside the grid, the link is in the description. But stay, because the reason this knowledge sits in old patents and old barns and not in every hardware store in America is the most important part of this entire conversation. The U.S. electricity industry collected $491 billion in revenue in 2023. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, that is not 491 million, it is $491 billion in 1 year from one country. Investor-owned electric companies in the United States held $2,177 billion in assets as of December 31st, 2024, according to the Edison Electric Institute. NextEra Energy alone, just one utility company, carried a market value of more than $155 billion as of June 2024. The global battery market, the business of selling you a replaceable power source, reached $138 billion in 2024. It is projected to reach $557 billion by 2033. Now understand what the Earth battery threatens to that model. You cannot put a meter on the zinc electrode in a man's garden. You cannot send a bill to the copper spike his daughter pushed into the soil behind the barn. You cannot create an invoice for a millivolt of current drawn from the bacterial metabolism of a teaspoon of earth. The chemistry is not patentable because natural laws cannot be owned. The United States Supreme Court confirmed this principle clearly. Natural phenomena, discovered or applied, cannot be patented. The original Earth battery patents expired over 100 years ago. Therefore, no corporation holds the rights to this device. It belongs to anyone who understands it, but regulations can accomplish what patents cannot. The National Electrical Code, which governs every state's electrical permitting system, requires that any electrical generation equipment connected to household wiring be permitted, inspected, and brought into compliance. This is not wrong in principle. Safety matters. But in practice, it means that even a small self-built array generating 5 watts of direct current cannot be legally wired into a home circuit without permit approval, licensed electrician inspection, and in some states, utility notification and interconnection review. The regulation does not say you cannot build this. It says you cannot use it to power your home without the same process a utility-scale solar installation must navigate. A process that costs money, time, and often months of waiting. You cannot bill a family for electricity drawn from the ground beneath their feet. But you can make using it inconvenient enough that most families go back to the meter. Now stand inside that for a moment. It is a cold morning. The ground outside is dark and damp. The frost has just left the soil. In the garden behind the house, 12 copper and zinc cells sit in the earth, connected in series. A wire runs to a small board on the fence. A sensor reads temperature and moisture. A clock keeps time. A small light burns above the gate, not from a line, not from a bill, from the ground itself, from the chemical logic of 2 unlike metals in damp earth, from the same reaction that powered telegraph stations before your great-grandparents were born. That is not a fantasy. That is physics. Now I want to be plain with you about what this system does and does not do. One soil cell produces between 0.5 and 1 volt of electricity. That is real but modest. A single cell will run a clock. It will light an LED. It will power a small sensor that monitors soil moisture, temperature, or light levels, but one cell will not replace your electric bill. To power useful household loads, you need many cells in series and a boost converter circuit to raise the voltage to usable levels. A well-built 12-cell array in rich, moist soil will reliably produce 8 to 10 volts and enough current to charge a small battery bank over several days. This is appropriate for cabin lights, sensor networks, fence energizers, and charging handheld devices. It is not a replacement for grid power in a full household. Here is how to build a working 4-cell demonstration array. You need 4 zinc electrodes and 4 copper electrodes. A pre-1982 American penny is 95% copper and works well as a copper electrode. A galvanized nail is zinc-coated steel and serves well as the zinc electrode. Each cell should be roughly a foot apart, oriented south to north along the magnetic meridian, which is roughly compass north in most of the United States. This alignment takes advantage of the natural flow of telluric currents in the Earth, which move broadly from south to north and add to the output of the galvanic reaction. Push each pair of electrodes into moist soil about 4 inches deep, 6 inches apart within each cell. Connect the zinc electrode of each cell to the copper electrode of the next using short wire segments. This is wiring in series. Measure the output from the final copper electrode to the first zinc electrode. In typical garden soil with adequate moisture, you will read between 1.8 and 3.6 volts. The soil should be moist, but not flooded. Organic rich garden soil produces the strongest output because it contains the most dissolved ionic material and the most microbial activity. Sandy soil produces less. Clay soil produces moderate output. A family in Holmesville, Ohio built a 20-cell array along the north fence of their kitchen garden using copper pipe scraps and galvanized rods. In the wet months of April through October, they consistently measured 14 to 16 volts open circuit. After adding a simple boost converter for $3 and a 4-amp-hour lithium cell for $18, the system charged a small LED lantern every single day from April through October without connecting to any grid or purchasing any fuel. Their total materials cost was $26. A commercially assembled off-grid sensor system doing the same task costs between $200 and $400 requires battery replacement every 18 months and produces no energy surplus. $26, no battery replacements, no fuel, no bill. Nathan Stubblefield understood this. The Iraqi craftsman of 250 BC understood this. Alexander Bain understood this in Scotland in 1841. The Amish communities of Holmes County, Ohio, who still run fence clocks and gate sensors from soil cells, understand it today. The EIA reported $491 billion in U.S. electricity revenue. NACE International reported that global corrosion from our dependence on metal infrastructure costs $2.5 trillion annually, and the global battery market keeps growing, projected to reach $557 billion within a decade. All of that revenue, all of those projections, built on the assumption that you do not know that 2 coins in damp soil produce electricity, that the earth itself is an electrolyte, that the knowledge sitting in expired patents from 1841 through 1901 has been quietly permitted to age in library archives while the meters kept turning. Now your family knows what Ruth Hochstetler's fence clock has known for 3 years. Share this with the person who still believes electricity only comes from a wall. Every share is a small thing against a very large model built entirely on your not knowing this. Next week, we will walk you through how the same principle applies underground. How settlers ran continuous current through buried iron pipes to power remote structures miles from any road. A technique the telegraph engineers documented in 1838 that no utility company ever saw a reason to bring back. We will see you there.